Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. I'm going to revisit a topic that I talked about a couple weeks ago, the Russian ASAT test, where they tested a direct ascent ASAT. I know I did a video on this a couple weeks ago, and I did it right after the test to give you some of my preliminary ideas and kind of insights about what I thought was going on and some other things. It's been a couple weeks. I've been seeing some other people talking about it in the media and other venues, and I wanted to kind of step back and just revisit the topic one more time, and just give you some further insight, talk about some of the narratives that are out there, and kind of tighten up my last analysis. And I got a little presentation here I'm going to use. Get it up here, and we'll go side by side again to do this. Now, there's a lot of talk about this test, and depending on who's talking about it, there are different viewpoints on it. But there are some things that have come up that have really caught my eye and really need to be addressed. And I guess the first thing is basically this idea of operational versus non-operational. I've seen a lot of things. A lot of things where experts are saying, well, this probably isn't an operational system, and concluding, hence, this probably isn't a threat or anything we have to worry about. And that's, I think, a false sense of security that, just because a system isn't, quote, operational doesn't mean that it isn't something that can be considered a threat. And because the idea is, even though a system may be operational, it still has the capability of inflicting some harm on satellites, and is particularly in low Earth orbit. In other words, even though the system is operational, it's still potentially a capable system that could be used in a limited fashion. Now, but what has to be reconciled here is, beyond operational versus non-operational, is whether or not the system has the capacity to actually be something that could provide a robust offense against satellites in low Earth orbit. In other words, even though it may be operational, does operational mean it has the capacity? So I think what I want you to understand here is, just because a system is deemed non-operational doesn't mean in a pinch it couldn't be used. For example, if the U.S. NATO got into a scuffle with the Russian Federation and things started heating up, the Russian Federation might decide, satellites are a major problem because they can see where we're coming from, and a lot of their communications are handled by satellites. You know what? We have this system. We have it in a limited fashion. Let's use it to kind of degrade their capability a little bit. Now, the U.S. has a philosophy of what's called resilience. In other words, our systems are robust enough and redundant enough that we can take a hit and still keep on going. I've not really been a fan of resilience because it's basically saying we can keep on taking a gut punch and you're not going to hit back. So eventually, depending on whether the system has a capacity, an ASAT system has a capacity, that gut punch may eventually overwhelm you and knock you out. So the idea is, non-operational systems can still have the capability to erode or damage satellite systems. However, they may not have the capacity to overwhelm them to the point where the idea of resilience fails. Utility of assets. This is another one I've seen come up, and I've been a little bit critical of. And the idea is, okay, these hard kill ASATs, they're really not useful. What are they useful for? I mean, let's face it, hard kill ASATs, they create a big mess in orbit, and nobody wants that. Nobody in their right mind wants to do that. And I mean, we look at what happened with the 2007 Chinese test. I'm still dealing with debris problems from that. The Indian test last year, there's still some debris from that test left in orbit too, and it caused a lot of controversy and scuffle. And the idea is, what, these things aren't useful because they cause such controversy and such a mess and collateral damage in terms of orbital debris, and we get into the so-called Kessler syndrome, where smaller pieces create more pieces, and so on and so forth. So I think it's false logic in the sense that just because these things cause a lot of damage and can have a lot of unintended consequences doesn't mean they're going to be used. Now, understand there are two types of ASATs. There are hard kill ASATs, which are kinetics, the one that basically incapacitates satellite by either hitting it directly or detonating near it and incapacitating it that way. As I mentioned before, very messy, and they cause a lot of collateral unintended consequences down the road, and the debris can last for years. However, there are also soft kill ASATs, and basically that's more or less techniques of jamming satellite communications, optically blinding using lasers on the optics themselves to blind it, and sometimes even burning out the video sensor, and even cyber, where you get inside you hack the satellite and either disable the satellite or the whole satellite network. That's what we consider soft kill, because what happens during these types of attacks, these soft kill operations, is the satellite's still left intact. It's not causing a lot of debris. Now, then people will say, well, since you have this soft kill ability, why use a hard kill? Because fundamentally, hard kill basically causes a very large psychological impact on an adversary. If a Russian ASAT or an ASAT from the PRC were to take out one or two U.S. satellites, there'd be a tremendous psychological blow. In basically in morale, and in terms of the fact, wow, we just got hit big time. And of course, if that leaked out to the public, there would be, a lot of, concern. Oh my, are we vulnerable? And hard kill ASATs also kind of fit into the idea of the PRC's version of deterrence called WAISH. Basically, WAISH says that preemptive force isn't off the table in our form of deterrence, because if we can use preemptive force to strike a blow on the adversary, it may stop them and make them think about escalating or pursuing the conflict further, and may actually stop hostilities altogether and get them to back off. That's kind of Russian nuclear. That was kind of a Soviet nuclear strategy too. They didn't really believe in mutual assured destruction. They believed nuclear war was winnable under certain conditions. Of course, given the state of U.S. nuclear forces at the time, they obviously things didn't go nuts, and we didn't end up actually testing out that theory, which is a good thing. So I want you to understand the idea that ASAT, these hard kill ASATs don't have a utility is probably false hope, because just because they can cause a lot of damage doesn't mean that people are necessarily thinking about that at the moment. They're just thinking about how can I damage the enemy, both from terms of physical assets, but also damage the enemy psychologically. U.S. response to the test. Now, a lot of people basically were very critical of the U.S. response. Oh, this was overblown. We've known they've had these capabilities for a while. This isn't a big deal. Why are we making such a big deal out of it right now? Well, I think for two reasons. One, at that point we were at a high point in the pandemic, and in a sense, I think the Russian Federation was kind of nipping around, seeing what kind of response it could get out of the U.S. And well, they got a response. So they did get a response overall with this test, and actually considering the activities of their other satellite. And I talked about this in a video about a month or so ago. They have basically been using one of their inspector satellites to get pretty close to a U.S. intelligence gathering satellite, and we've made a lot of diplomatic comments that this was not acceptable, because the feeling was this could be kind of a dress rehearsal for a co-orbital ASAT. And again, if you want to refer back to that video, I did a video and kind of really analyzed that and such. So I think the U.S. response was proper. It basically made it clear that this was unacceptable, and we don't think this is responsible behavior. Did the Russian Federation perform this test to encourage a ban on ASATs? I think fundamentally I've seen this come up a little bit, and I know after the Indian ASAT tests, the Russian Federation kind of moved forward with the idea of a ban on on these types of tests in the United Nations, and it's been suggested that this might have been an effort to get the U.S. to make a counter proposal and kind of get the U.S. into the game, into the diplomatic game, which would give the Russian Federation more prestige and more soft power, as they could as they would, I think, would make unreasonable demands and offer terms that were unverifiable and make themselves look like the good guy and the U.S. look like the bad guy. So I think this is more. I do think this test had a lot to do with enhancing the Russian Federation's soft power as well, and then out of the People's Republic of China, say one thing and do another. So fundamentally, yeah, I think that was part of it. Again, I think a big part was to test the response of the U.S. And I say that more or less because there have been other incidents in other domains, in particular, Russian fighter aircraft intercepting and coming pretty close to naval maritime aircraft, and Russian aircraft actually harassing and I guess flying right over U.S. warships. And actually, there's an agreement that the U.S. and Russian Federation had in place since the 70s called the Incidents on the High Sea Agreement. And basically, I mean, those actions basically flew in the face of those actions. But I think again, all in all, it's to gauge the response of the United States in the midst of this domestic issue we're having here at the moment. Do we need to panic? I actually saw, this is kind of paraphrasing a headline I saw to an article just the other day. It made for good clickbait, let's put it that way. I read it and I said, okay, this is interesting and a good way to get somebody to click on it and look. But do we need to panic about this? My instinctive reaction is you should never, panic is always a bad idea. You just don't, it doesn't facilitate, good decision making afterwards and more reflex than actually thought out response. So, but fundamentally, no, we don't need to panic. We do know they've had these capabilities for a while. The intelligence community came out big time last year in a public way and basically put out that, they are concerned both from the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation about these capabilities that they're developing. Isn't clear if they deployed them. That wasn't mentioned in any of the reports, but it did, I'm sure there's more information available, but that's for a totally different pay grade altogether and non-public, and frankly, we probably don't need to know about it. But granted, this is definitely a concern because these types of weapons can play havoc with our space systems, and both, the U.S. and its allies are very dependent on these space systems, and our adversaries know that. In fact, our adversaries, they do recognize outer space as being the high ground and how important the high ground really is. So, do we need to panic? No, and it's never good to panic. Fear can be a bad thing if it's not properly channeled and controlled, and panicking is definitely not controlling fear. You got to think these things through, and I'm sure there are protocols in place that I'm sure steps are being taken to address this. One of those being the U.S. response to this. So overall, that's kind of some of my additional thoughts on this. It is what it is. This is a game of geopolitics, folks. This game's been being played for 1,000 years, and it's being played now. And I really think, I think things right now are ratcheting up a little bit more, or a lot more in that sense, in terms of what's going on in the South China Sea, what's going on, in the Mediterranean and such, and the Middle East. The U.S. is definitely, in the world for that matter, is in the midst of, trying to get through this pandemic. And there's a lot of geopolitical opportunism going on, and things like this to test the response of a major power like the U.S. is bound to come up. So I consider this this event not surprising, but that doesn't mean it's not concerning. But again, like I said, we shouldn't panic. So that's all I have for today. It's a great day out here in New Hampshire, and I'm going to go out and get a little bit of sunshine before the sun sets. Again, I wish you well, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you next time.